32 kilometers of dust and rocks lay between a dying boy and his only hope. A royal official possessed immense power and unlimited wealth under Herod Antipas. Yet he stood completely helpless as his son took his final, shallow breaths. What good is a treasury full of gold when your child is slipping into the cold embrace of death? How far would you walk into the unknown when the only thing you have left is a stranger's word? Most of us seek a sign, a physical touch, or a visible miracle before we dare to believe, but the most brutal test of faith is not when God says no. It is when he gives you nothing but a spoken promise and commands you to walk into a 24-hour silence without a single shred of physical proof. This official had spent his entire life building walls of security around his family. He was a man of high status under Herod Antipas, controlling soldiers and managing wealth. But when the fever struck his son, his palace suddenly felt like a beautifully decorated prison. I remember sitting outside an intensive care unit years ago, watching a wealthy businessman weep. He was offering to transfer all his corporate shares to anyone who could make the flatline on the monitor dance again. In that heavy hospital air, I realized that human power is just an illusion we cling to until real tragedy arrives. The official did not travel 32 kilometers because he possessed a beautiful or mature faith. He ran to Cana because he had run out of options, and his prestige could not buy a single breath for his dying child. He was a desperate father, dragging his broken pride through the dirt, begging for a miracle. When the official finally stood before Jesus in Cana, he expected a physical rescue. "Please come down before my child dies," he begged, assuming that divine power required physical proximity. But Jesus did not move a single inch. Instead, he looked at the desperate father and issued a blunt command: "Go, your son will live." I remember reading this for the first time and feeling a deep sense of anger at the coldness of this response. Why would a loving Savior refuse to walk a few hours to comfort a breaking heart? Is he just playing a cruel game with a dying child? But then I realized that Jesus was not withholding his compassion. He was destroying a dangerous trap. He was refusing to satisfy our human demand that we must see a sign before we dare to trust. He forced the official to choose between a visible guarantee and a naked spoken word. The text says, "The man believed the word that Jesus spoke and went on his way." He turned his back on the prophet and began the long journey home to Capernaum alone. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon when those words were spoken, and the sun was high. But as the hours pressed on, the shadows of the Galilean hills began to lengthen and swallow the road. Imagine signing a life or death contract where the other party gives you no paperwork, no deposit, and only a verbal promise. You are forced to walk away into the night, staking the survival of the person you love most on a single sentence. With every kilometer that passed through the pitch-black darkness, the footsteps of the official grew heavier. The silence of the night became a breeding ground for a terrifying internal warfare. A cynical voice inside his head must have screamed that he was a fool for leaving the healer behind. Every rustle of the wind through the olive trees sounded like a messenger bringing news of his son's death. Yet he kept putting one bleeding foot in front of the other, fighting the urge to turn back to Cana. He was not walking by sight or feeling, he was desperately clinging to a memory of a voice. The first rays of dawn finally broke over the horizon as the official approached Capernaum. His body was exhausted, but his mind was captured by a strange and unnatural stillness. Suddenly, a group of his servants appeared running down the road with faces illuminated by pure joy. "Your son is alive and well," they shouted, breaking the morning quiet. The father did not celebrate immediately. Instead, he asked for the exact hour when the boy began to recover. They replied that the fever left him yesterday at the 7th hour, which was exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That was the precise moment Jesus had looked him in the eyes 32 kilometers away and said, "Go, your son will live." The miracle had already been accomplished the very second he chose to trust the promise and take his first step into the dark. His faith was completely transformed in that moment, shifting from a desperate desire for a physical healing to a profound worship of the Savior himself. This ancient story reminds us that when we face our own silent valleys, God often demands our obedience before he grants our vision. Thank you for watching this video. And if this message strengthened your faith, please subscribe to the channel to walk with us through more deep biblical journeys.